Story 1. When I was younger, I went through a phase of being very into Ouija boards. I was always fascinated by the supernatural and was, quite frankly, disappointed that nothing had ever happened to me. That changed during a sleepover that I attended in 3rd grade. Myself, along with 5 or so other girls from my class, were staying the night at the house of another classmate of ours. Nothing of significance happened until late after her parents had gone to bed. We had played light as a feather, stiff as a board, and Bloody Mary to no avail, so we had essentially given up on our mission to make contact with the beyond until one of the girls, who was my best friend at the time, smiled and pulled something out of her bag. It was a Ouija board. The host of the sleepover was instantly really upset and demanded that it be taken out of the house. We asked her why she was so mad about it, but she didn't really have a reason. She just insisted that we put it away, or else her mom would freak out. Her mom was really religious, so we just assumed that it was a superstitious thing. The girl whose board it was would not accept that as a valid reason to stop. So we started to play. No one except me, the girl who the board belonged to, and the sleepover host really believed. We had asked several questions, and while the pointer did move, they attributed it to me or my best friend moving it. They say that the pointer moves because someone playing is subconsciously moving it. That could have been true, so we decided to ask a question that I knew for sure I only knew the answer to. I intentionally did not put my hand on the piece to try and prove a point, and the piece started moving immediately. It had spelled 3 letters correct when my friend's mom came into the room. I will never forget the expression on her face. It was one of pure terror and absolute disgust. I went to school with this girl and was one of her best friends from ages 5 to 13. I knew her mother very well, and never before then, or since then, have I seen her so profoundly upset. She was so livid that she actually called everyone's parents at 2 a.m. and insisted that they come pick us up. Ouija boards usually have some sort of sun, moon, some other contradicting nature type things in the top corners. The one we played with had an open eye in the left upper corner and a closed eye in the right. When we went back to pack up our stuff, we noticed that it had moved from the letter we had left it on, and it was solidly over the open eye. My friend and I looked at each other and decided it would be best not to share that with anyone else so as to not cause unnecessary panic. When school started on the next Monday, we all ran up to the host asking what the hell had happened and why her mom got so upset. She was visibly shaken and did not want to talk about it. After being goaded all day by everyone who had attended the sleepover, she finally cracked. The story went that when her mom was in high school, she had this group of friends that she hung around with pretty much constantly. 2 members of the group were dating. One day, when they were juniors, they decided to play with the Ouija board. They also decided to ask the one question that you are not supposed to ask: when am I going to die? One by one, they each took turns asking this, and the board gave them all answers. Curiously, the couple both got the same date. For a while, everyone kept the dates in the back of their minds, but as the years went on with no deaths, they lost their impact. The couple stayed together throughout college, and one weekend, the boyfriend took his girlfriend on a trip with the intention of proposing to her. They were both murdered. A murder that has gone unsolved, on the day that the board had predicted they would both die. Now I have no way of verifying the authenticity of her story, but based on both the reaction of my friend's mom and the manner with which my friend retold the story to us, I have no doubts in my mind that it is true. Now, it has been 15 years since this happened, and nothing has happened in regards to the board resting on the open eye. But I refuse to participate in Ouija boards, and I strongly urge anyone who expresses interest not to as well. Story 2. I decided to share this story as a warning for anyone who might be thinking of playing with a Ouija board this Halloween. Please be careful, folks. Evil is out there. It exists, and it isn't here to play nice. I can only hope and pray that you will take this warning seriously. This happened on Saturday. My friends and I were playing with this Ouija board that we found at Goodwill. It was the old school type made out of wood. Now, let me be clear by saying I don't believe in ghosts, so I wasn't scared playing this. In fact, I encouraged it because I wanted to show my friends how stupid the whole thing was. The dang thing was only $10, and I thought it was an antique. It could be worth more money someday. I considered it an investment, if anything. There were 3 of us: Caden, Ainsley, and me. We sat on my living room floor in the dark with the exception of one lone candle flickering at the top of the board. I would be lying if I said we didn't have the spookiest setup ever. We all put our fingers on the planchette and Caden started with the first question. Is there anyone here with us? The planchette slowly moved to the yes section of the board. I rolled my eyes, thinking my friends were playing a joke on me. Caden had always been quite the jokester. I'd be damned if he was going to pull one on me this easily. Ainsley was next, always the worrywart. She had a nervous look on her face as she asked the next question. Who are you? The planchette drifted over to the letter D, then stopped. I piped up immediately. D, really guys? What's that supposed to stand for? The devil? This is stupid. Ainsley was squeezing her hands, and Caden was looking at me with his mouth hanging open. He finally spoke up. Ryan, we aren't doing anything. This is some creepy shit. I was done with the games. I kicked the board and told them I was done playing. My friends were trying to make me out to be a fool, and I wasn't going to let them insult my intelligence. Anyone can read up on how to play these games. The concept is simple. That's why you need more than one hand on the planchette, so you can lie about who is actually moving it. Everyone can deny their role in the game. That's what I thought. That's what I believed. Then, something happened that made me question my sanity. It made me question everything I have ever believed. There was a knock at the door. It was late, around 1 a.m., so I had no idea who would be knocking on my door at this time of night. I went to unlock the door when Ainsley ran up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder to stop me. No, don't open the door, Ryan. It could be D. Ha! You think the devil is at my door? I told you I'm not falling for your stupid game. Nice try though, really. 3 more loud knocks interrupted my outburst, and I peeked out the peephole before unlocking the door. Chills ran down my spine. It was a tall figure standing in a black robe. The hood of the robe hung low in front of its face, a black shadow of depth staring back at me. What the? Who the? Caden and Ainsley were already peeking out of the side window beside me from my reaction. I was beyond mad at them. Really? Setting this game up to this extent to have someone come to my door at this hour dressed all creepy? You guys are assholes. Seriously. The jig is up. I'm going to let your friend inside. It's late. They both had screamed and jumped at me before I had the chance to unlock the door. Ainsley held my face in both of her hands and looked at me dead in the eyes. Ryan, this is real. We aren't messing with you. Caden started to walk backwards away from the door with fear in his eyes. Death. That's what the D stands for. Death. It's death at our door. We summon death. I can't describe the look of fear in both of their eyes. I knew in this moment that this was real. Nobody can fake that level of fear. We ran upstairs and locked ourselves in my bedroom until daylight. We kept looking outside, and with each hour that passed by, the robed figure stood at the door waiting, patiently. Once the sun came up, the figure disappeared. This happened Saturday night. Sunday, Caden got into a car crash on his way home from my house and died. Then, as if that wasn't devastating enough, I got the call that Ainsley had passed away Tuesday morning from an apparent drug overdose. I'm scared. I don't know what to think. I didn't believe these types of games. Ghosts weren't supposed to be real. 2 of my friends have died from this damn game. You can call it a coincidence, but 2 deaths in that short amount of time just can't be conjured up as normal. I can't help but assume that I'm going to be next. If I survive, I will post on here to update you all in the weeks to come. But if I don't, please heed my warning. Ouija boards are dangerous. Story 3. I matched with this really cute yet mysterious girl on Tinder named Jessica. We hit it off almost instantly, much to my surprise, as I usually never have luck with these sorts of things. She was very beautiful and gothic looking, with a wardrobe that had to have been all black. We started off simply talking about horror movies that we both loved, and just went from there. I was a little surprised when not long into our first conversation, she invited me over to her place. I thought this seemed a little soon and sort of hasty on her part, but who was I to turn down a date with a cute girl? After all, what could really go wrong, I remember thinking. If only I knew what was to come. I arrived at her place around nightfall the next day. She had a small house to herself at the edge of a dead-end road. It was a pretty nice and secluded spot in the middle of the woods. Jessica greeted me at her door before I even had the chance to knock. She seemed super eager to have me over, plus she was even more beautiful and enchanting than her pictures suggested. Upon entering her house, I noticed that all of her windows had been blacked out with paint. The walls were lined with satanic and pagan imagery, with the house being solely lit by candlelight. I found this all odd, but chalked it up to her just being very committed to the whole goth aesthetic. I should have known instantly that something was off and just turned around and left, but sadly I didn't. Jessica led me to her bedroom, which carried the aesthetic of the rest of the house. She then motioned for me to take a seat on her bed, handing me a small pipe as she sat down beside me. I took the first hit of what she claimed was weed, despite it not smelling or tasting anything like weed. It had admittedly been a while since I smoked last, so I decided not to say anything about it. We smoked and watched an old silent horror film for about a half hour or so before she abruptly turned the movie off. She promptly hopped off the bed, searching underneath it for a few minutes before finally pulling out a dusty Ouija board. I immediately tensed up upon sight of it, having never seen one in person before. She must have noticed my reaction as she said to me, "You're not scared already, are you?" Not wanting to seem like a coward, I told her no and threw on a brave face. She went around the room, blowing out all of the candles except for a single red one that was different from the rest. We sat across from each other on her bed, with the Ouija board now between us. I expected we would just ask a few cliché questions before getting bored with it and moving on to something else, but that's not at all what happened. I began to realize at this point that I was starting to feel something from that weed, or whatever it was that we smoked. I didn't feel high necessarily, just entranced in a way. It was almost as if I was no longer in control of my thoughts or actions. She pulled out an ancient-looking journal, flipping through its torn, yellowed pages until she landed on the one she was looking for, per her instructions. We both laid the tips of our fingers on the wooden planchette as she began to read incantations out of the book. I'm still not entirely sure what language she was speaking in, but it was certainly not English. The flame of the red candle started to flicker violently as she continued reading from the book. I then felt the presence of something suddenly enter the room. Whatever it was, though, it didn't feel human or benevolent. Then the flame of the candle went out and we were plunged into darkness. I sat frozen in terror, afraid to even move a muscle or break the uneasy silence. At least a minute or two passed before I started to notice really heavy breathing, almost like a dog panting, coming from the corner of the room. I reached my hands forward to see if maybe Jessica had gotten up without me noticing. My hands landed on her thighs, but I noticed that she seemed to be wet, drenched even. I was so confused and disoriented that I almost forgot about the breathing in the corner of the room. I could still hear it, only now it had gotten closer. Now it was coming from right next to the bed, a mere foot or so away from me. Not knowing what else to do or where to go, I closed my eyes as tight as I possibly could and put my hands over my ears. After a couple of minutes, I opened my eyes back up. I could see again finally. Somehow all of the candles except for the red one were now lit again. My eyes darted to each corner of the room looking for the source of the heavy breathing that I heard only moments before. There was nobody. I then focused my eyes back on Jessica, who was still sitting in front of me. Her head was hanging down and her stringy, jet black hair hung over her face, obscuring it. I tried to shake her, but she didn't move or say anything. I began to push her hair back when I noticed she was covered in blood. I shook her again, harder this time, and her head fell back. I still can't get the image out of my head. There were two bloody, gaping holes where her eyes used to be. They weren't just missing, though. It looked like they had been clawed out of her skull, as if that wasn't disturbing enough. She was grinning from ear to ear, almost like she was frozen in the middle of laughing hysterically. I knew that I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. I slid off her bed and hastily slipped my shoes on. As I was heading for the bedroom door to leave, I heard Jessica start laughing behind me. I slowly turned my head, just to make sure that I wasn't hearing things. I could see from my peripheral vision that she was still seated on the bed, only now, she was rocking back and forth with her head turned towards me, still grinning. I immediately flung the door open, stumbling as I ran for the front door. I made it to my car without looking back once. I could still hear her haunting laughter as I started my car and pulled off. I looked in my rearview mirror as I reached the road to see her standing on her front porch, waving at me. Only she wasn't the one moving her hand. Her body was dead limp. A large, shadowy creature with horns was holding her body up and shaking her arm to mimic her waving. I could see that he, or rather it, shared the same toothy, devilish grin that she had. I got back to my apartment and didn't leave my bed for days. I couldn't even sleep. Every single time that I closed my eyes, all I saw was her, still eyeless and still smiling at me. I remember when I first got home and how I contemplated whether or not I should contact the authorities. I decided against it, ultimately out of fear that I would be blamed for her death and mutilation. About a week passed and I had still heard nothing in the local news concerning her or her death. I began to become paranoid that perhaps I had accidentally left something there that could trace me back to her murder. My worries and paranoia quickly subsided, however, as only a few days later her body was found. Her mom had called the police after she hadn't heard from her daughter in several days. Apparently it was an open and shut case. The police uncovered that she had been involved in several local cults that practiced witchcraft and the occult. They simply concluded that she had died due to her own association with these dangerous cults, and that she was part of some sort of human sacrifice. I slowly but surely began to get over the whole experience and move on with my life. Or at least I felt like I was moving past it all. I got back on Tinder after about a month or so of isolating myself and avoiding all human contact. I went on a few dates with some decent normal girls, but there was never a spark between us, or at least I never felt it. I still thought of Jessica a lot, but I always tried to push those thoughts and images out of my head as quickly as they popped up. I was usually pretty successful at doing so, until nighttime came around, that is. At first it was just little things. For example, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find all my lights on, even though I clearly remembered turning them off before bed. The worst nights, though, were the ones where I was woken up by a faint yet distinct laughter coming from my bedroom closet. It happened at most a few times a week, which admittedly sounds quite torturous. However, it always went away on its own if I just pretended to be asleep. Rather than these events slowing down or coming to a stop even, things have just continued to ramp up and increase in strangeness. I was sleeping in late one Sunday when I was suddenly jolted by someone furiously pounding on my front door. I slowly crept up to the peephole, more curious about who would be knocking on my door on a Sunday afternoon more than anything. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Jessica, just standing there, still smiling at me with that inhuman grin. She looked up into the peephole with two black voids where her eyes used to be. I knew that what I was seeing shouldn't have been possible, but I also knew that I wasn't just seeing things. I backed away from the door slowly, attempting to make as little noise as possible. Her pounding on my door continued for the next 2 hours before just abruptly stopping. I ran back to the peephole just in time to catch a glimpse of stringy, black hair as it turned the corner at the end of my hallway. I just wanted all of this to end. Everything seemed to be back to normal finally. All of the strange, nighttime phenomena that had been routinely taking place just stopped. I couldn't have been more relieved. I should have known better than to get my hopes up, though. This next occurrence happened only 3 nights ago when I came back home late after a night of hitting the local bars. I wasn't inebriated, but I also wasn't sober, so it's not much of a surprise that I didn't even notice that my front door was unlocked when I arrived home. I kicked off my shoes upon entering my apartment and fell back onto my couch. I had yet to turn a light on, so it took a minute before my eyes adjusted to the darkness, revealing something laying in the middle of my living room floor. As I got up to take a closer look, chills ran up my spine as I recognized it to be the same Ouija board that Jessica and I had played with months earlier. I immediately sobered up, grabbed my car keys, and left my apartment. I looked back to my apartment once I got to my car, afraid of what I might see. I expected to see Jessica standing in my window, but instead I saw the horned, shadowy figure that I had seen once before. It was just standing there, looking down at me and waving while keeping that same sinister grin. I've been sleeping in my car ever since. I usually just stop at rest areas to use the bathrooms there and to try and catch some sleep. However, I've barely been able to get more than a few hours of rest over the last 72 hours. Every time I start to drift off, I'm met with that distinct, menacing laughter ringing in my ears. I'm not even sure what other options I have at this point. I've almost begun to accept this as just being part of my life now. I've come to accept that there may be no hope left for me, as I truly don't know what else to do. I do know one thing, though. If I could go back in time and change one thing, I would make sure that I never laid a finger on that Ouija board.